I thought I was just a normal guy, working long shifts, paying bills, trying to build a future with the woman I loved. But then one night, something happened. I had a dream so vivid, so real. It felt like someone grabbed my shoulders and said, "Wake up, look closer." I tried ignoring it, until the second dream came. This time, it didn't feel like imagination. It felt like a warning that if I didn't listen, I was about to lose more than I could ever replace. I heard voices, familiar voices, saying things I wasn't supposed to hear. When I woke up, my heart was racing like I'd just escaped something. I didn't understand it then. But that dream, it was the beginning of everything changing. My name is Marcus, and I grew up in a small town just outside of Savannah, Georgia, where the summers are long and humid, and everybody knows everybody else's business. I was raised by my grandmother after my mother passed away when I was 11 years old, and my father disappeared somewhere between the bottom of a whiskey bottle and the open highway. My grandmother was a woman of deep faith and even deeper love, and she taught me that a man's worth is measured not by what he has, but by how he treats the people around him. She would sit on the porch every evening reading her Bible with a glass of sweet tea in her hand, and she would tell me stories about how God had protected our family through generations of hardship. I believed her back then with the simple, unquestioning faith of a child, but as I grew older and life started pressing down on me with its full weight, I started to wonder if God was really paying attention to someone like me. I was not special. I was not destined for greatness. I was just a warehouse worker pulling 12-hour shifts and trying to keep my head above water while the current kept pulling me under. I started working at the distribution center when I was 19 years old, right after I graduated high school, with grades that were just good enough to get me across the stage, but not good enough to get me into any college that mattered. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I would save up some money and figure out my next move and eventually find my way to something better. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you are not paying attention. And before I knew it, 5 years had passed, and I was still unloading trucks and stacking pallets and watching the same fluorescent lights flicker overhead day after day. The work was hard on my body and even harder on my spirit, but I kept showing up because that is what my grandmother taught me to do. You show up, you do the work, you do not complain. You trust that God has a plan even when you cannot see it. I met Vanessa on a rainy Saturday afternoon in October when she walked into the convenience store where I had stopped to buy an energy drink before my night shift. She was standing by the coffee machine looking frustrated because the hazelnut flavor was empty, and she let out this little sigh of disappointment that for some reason made me smile. I do not know what came over me, but I walked up to her and said something stupid like, "The universe must be testing your patience today," and she looked at me with these deep brown eyes and laughed. That laugh changed everything. We talked for 10 minutes in that convenience store, and by the time I walked out, I had her phone number saved in my phone and this strange warm feeling in my chest that I had not felt in years. I did not know it then, but that moment was the beginning of both the best and worst chapter of my life. Vanessa was beautiful in a way that made you forget how to form complete sentences. She had long dark hair that fell past her shoulders and a smile that could light up any room she walked into, and this confidence about her that made you feel like you were the only person in the world when she was looking at you. She worked part-time as a receptionist at a dental office, and she was taking classes at the community college trying to get her degree in business administration. She had dreams of opening her own salon one day, and when she talked about it, her eyes would sparkle with this passion that made me want to do anything I could to help her get there. I fell hard and I fell fast, and within 3 months I was completely and utterly in love with her in a way that consumed every part of my being. Looking back now, I can see all the red flags that I was too blind to notice at the time. I can see how she would only call me when she needed something. I can see how she would cancel plans at the last minute with vague excuses that never quite added up. I can see how she would get defensive whenever I asked about her friends or her whereabouts, or why she was always so protective of her phone. But love has a way of making you stupid, and I was the stupidest man alive when it came to Vanessa. I believed every word she said because I wanted to believe. I ignored every warning sign because admitting the truth would have meant admitting that the only good thing in my life was actually destroying me from the inside out. The thing about being in love with someone who does not truly love you back is that you start making sacrifices that no one ever asks you to make. You start giving pieces of yourself away, hoping that if you just give enough, they will finally see your worth and love you the way you love them. I gave Vanessa everything I had, and then I gave her things I did not have because I thought that was what love required. When her car broke down, I took out a personal loan to help her fix it even though I was already behind on my credit card payments. When her rent was due, and she was short, I covered the difference even though it meant skipping my own electric bill. When she said she needed money for her college textbooks, I sold my motorcycle, the one thing I owned that brought me any joy, and handed her the cash without hesitation. I was drowning in debt and sinking deeper every month, but I kept telling myself it was worth it because we were building a future together, and one day all of this sacrifice would pay off. I was working 12-hour shifts at the warehouse, sometimes 6 days a week, just to keep up with her needs and my own mounting bills. I would come home exhausted with my back aching and my feet throbbing, and she would barely look up from her phone when I walked through the door. I would fall asleep on the couch because I was too tired to make it to the bedroom, and she would step over me on her way out to meet her friends without even saying goodbye. I told myself she was just stressed. I told myself she was just focused on school. I told myself that once she got her degree and we got on our feet, things would be different. I was lying to myself every single day, and I knew it, but the truth was too painful to face. The debt kept piling up until I could not even keep track of how much I owed anymore. Bank loans, credit cards, payday advances, money I had borrowed from old friends who were starting to avoid my calls. My rent was 3 months behind, and my landlord was threatening eviction, and I had started skipping meals just to make sure I had enough gas money to get to work. I was living on ramen noodles and broken promises, and the only thing keeping me going was this belief that Vanessa was my future. She was the light at the end of the tunnel. She was the reason all of this suffering would eventually make sense. I was so wrong. I was so incredibly, painfully, devastatingly wrong. The first dream came on a Thursday night in February. I remember the date because it was exactly 1 week before Vanessa's birthday, and I had been working overtime every day trying to save up enough money to take her to this fancy restaurant downtown that she had been talking about for months. I was so exhausted that I fell asleep the moment my head hit the pillow, and almost immediately I was somewhere else. It was not like a normal dream where things are hazy and disconnected, and you wake up barely remembering what happened. This dream was crystal clear, like I was watching a movie of my own life playing out on a screen in front of me. I saw Vanessa sitting in the passenger seat of a black car that I did not recognize. The windows were tinted, but I could see through them perfectly, like the glass was not even there. She was laughing that same beautiful laugh that had captured my heart in the convenience store all those months ago, but she was not laughing with me. She was laughing with someone else. There was a man in the driver's seat, and even though his face was blurred and indistinct, I could see that he was wearing an expensive watch and a tailored shirt, and he had this air of wealth about him that I could never hope to match. Vanessa was holding his hand and looking at him the way she used to look at me in the beginning before things started to change. Then she spoke, and her words hit me like a knife to the chest. She said, "He does not know anything, and I am going to leave him once I am stable." She said it so casually, so carelessly, like I was just a means to an end, like I was nothing more than a stepping stone on her path to something better. The man in the driver's seat laughed and said, "You really have him wrapped around your finger," and Vanessa smiled that beautiful, devastating smile and said he would do anything for me, and he does not even realize how pathetic it is. I woke up gasping for air with my heart pounding so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. My sheets were soaked with sweat and my hands were shaking, and I felt this overwhelming sense of dread that I could not explain. I sat there in the darkness trying to calm myself down, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream, just a nightmare born from stress and exhaustion and my own insecurities. I had been working too hard. I had been sleeping too little. My mind was just playing tricks on me, creating worst-case scenarios out of thin air. There was no man, there was no black car. Vanessa loved me. She had to love me. I had given her everything. I got out of bed and walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection in the mirror. I looked tired, older than my 24 years. There were dark circles under my eyes and lines on my forehead that had not been there a year ago. I barely recognized the person staring back at me. For a moment, I felt this profound sadness wash over me. What had happened to the hopeful young man who believed that hard work and dedication could overcome any obstacle? What had happened to the faith that my grandmother had instilled in me all those years ago? I had lost myself somewhere along the way, and I was not sure if I would ever find my way back. I went back to bed and tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes I saw Vanessa's face and heard her cruel words echoing in my mind. By the time my alarm went off at 5 in the morning, I had maybe slept another hour, and I felt worse than when I had laid down. I dragged myself through my shift at the warehouse, moving on autopilot while my thoughts kept drifting back to the dream. I told myself it did not mean anything. Dreams were just random firings of neurons. They were not prophecies. They were not warnings, they were just dreams. But something had shifted inside me, something I could not quite put into words. There was this voice in the back of my mind whispering that something was wrong, that something had been wrong for a long time and I had just been too afraid to see it. I pushed the voice away and focused on my work, and by the end of the day, I had almost convinced myself that everything was fine. Almost. That night, Vanessa texted me saying she was going to study at her friend's house and would not be home until late. I texted back telling her to be safe and that I loved her, and she responded with a simple heart emoji. No words, just a symbol. I stared at that emoji for a long time, wondering when we had stopped actually talking to each other, wondering when our conversations had become so shallow and transactional. Wondering if she even read my messages anymore, or if she just glanced at them and sent back whatever response required the least effort. I went to bed early that night hoping that I would be too tired to dream, but the moment I fell asleep, I was pulled into another vision that was even more vivid and disturbing than the first one. I was standing in a hallway that I did not recognize. The walls were painted a pale yellow color and there were photographs hanging on them, but the images were too blurry to make out. At the end of the hallway there was a door and it was slightly open and I could hear voices coming from the other side. I walked toward the door slowly like I was being pulled by an invisible force. Every step felt heavy like I was wading through water. I did not want to reach the door. I did not want to hear what was on the other side, but I could not stop myself from moving forward. When I reached the door, I pressed my ear against the crack and listened, and what I heard shattered whatever hope I had been holding onto. It was Vanessa's voice, but it sounded different, colder, more calculating. She was talking to someone, and even though I could not see them, I could tell it was the same man from the first dream. She said he pays all my bills, so I just let him think we are building something real. She laughed and said he is so desperate for someone to love him that he cannot see what is right in front of his face. She said I am not staying with him. The moment I do not need him anymore, I am gone. I wanted to scream. I wanted to push open the door and confront her. I wanted to demand answers and explanations and some kind of justification for the betrayal I was hearing. But I was frozen in place, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to do anything except listen. Then something changed. The hallway started to shake and the lights started flickering, and I felt this presence behind me. Something powerful, something ancient, something that was not quite human but was definitely real. I turned around and there was nothing there, but I heard a voice. A deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The voice said, "Stop before you lose everything." The words hit me with physical force and I stumbled backward and fell and kept falling, and then I was awake sitting upright in my bed with tears streaming down my face and my whole body trembling. I sat there for a long time in the darkness trying to process what had just happened. That was not a normal dream. That was not anxiety or stress or my subconscious playing tricks on me. That was something else. That was something real. I thought about my grandmother and all the stories she used to tell me about God speaking to people through dreams, about Joseph interpreting Pharaoh's visions, about Daniel receiving prophecies in his sleep, about the Magi being warned to avoid Herod in a dream. I had always thought those were just stories, ancient tales from a different time when people believed in miracles and signs and wonders. I never thought I would experience something like that myself. I never thought God would speak to someone as insignificant as me. But there I was, shaking, crying, knowing in my bones that I had just received a warning, knowing that something was very wrong and that I needed to pay attention before it was too late. The next day I tried to act normal around Vanessa, but I could not look at her without hearing those words from my dreams. He does not know anything. I am going to leave him once I am stable. He is so desperate. I am not staying with him. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if it was real or if she was just performing. Every time she said she loved me, I wondered if she had ever meant it even once. The doubt was eating me alive, and I knew I needed to do something before I drove myself completely insane. I confronted her that evening after dinner. I tried to be gentle about it. I did not want to accuse her of anything based on a dream because I knew how crazy that would sound. So I just told her that I had been having trouble sleeping, that I had been having nightmares about losing her, that I was feeling insecure about our relationship and I needed some reassurance. Vanessa looked at me with this expression of mild annoyance that she tried to cover with a thin layer of concern. She said, "Baby, you are overthinking everything." She said, "I love you and you know that." She said, "You have been working too hard and you are stressed and you are letting your imagination run wild." She reached out and touched my face and told me there was nothing to worry about and that we were fine and that I needed to stop being so paranoid. I wanted to believe her. God knows I wanted to believe her more than anything. But there was this feeling in my gut, this heaviness, this certainty that she was lying to me even as the words came out of her mouth. I nodded and said okay and let her hug me and pretended that everything was resolved, but inside I knew the truth. Something was wrong, and I was going to find out what it was. The next few days were some of the hardest of my life. I went to work, I came home, I ate dinner with Vanessa, I went to bed, I woke up, I repeated the cycle. On the surface everything looked normal, but underneath I was watching, paying attention to details I had ignored before, noticing things I had refused to see. I noticed that Vanessa's phone was always face down on the table. I noticed that she would take calls in the other room with the door closed. I noticed that she would come home late smelling like cologne that was not mine. I noticed that she would get dressed up on nights when she claimed she was just hanging out with girlfriends. I noticed the way she would look at her phone and smile in a way that she never smiled at me anymore. But I still did not have proof. I still did not have anything concrete that I could point to and say this is the betrayal. This is the lie. I was just a suspicious boyfriend who had weird dreams, and even I knew that was not enough to justify blowing up my entire relationship. Then I remembered something that my grandmother used to say. She said when you are looking for the truth, you should follow the money because money never lies. She was a practical woman and she knew that people could hide a lot of things, but financial records always told the real story. So I decided to check my bank account, really check it, not just glance at the balance like I usually did, but actually go through every transaction for the past several months. What I found made my blood run cold. I had given Vanessa access to my debit card a few months earlier because she said it would be easier for her to pick up groceries and essentials while I was at work. I trusted her completely, so I never bothered to monitor what she was spending. I just assumed she was using it for the things she said she was using it for. Food, gas, maybe the occasional personal item. I had no idea how wrong I was. There were restaurant charges, expensive restaurants, places I had never been to and could never afford. There were hotel charges, a boutique hotel downtown that I had driven past 100 times but had never dreamed of staying at. There were late-night rideshare charges from addresses I did not recognize to locations across town. There were purchases at jewelry stores and clothing boutiques and wine shops, all of it on my card, all of it draining my already depleted bank account. But the worst part was the details. The transaction descriptions sometimes included additional information, and as I scrolled through the charges I started to see a pattern. Restaurant charges with notes about reservations for two, hotel charges with names that were not mine, ride-share trips that started at unfamiliar addresses late at night and ended at the apartment I paid for. She was not just cheating on me, she was using my money to do it. Every romantic dinner with this other man, every hotel room tryst, every gift and bottle of wine and night on the town, I was the one paying for it. I was funding my own betrayal without even knowing it. I sat there staring at my phone screen, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the phone. My vision was blurring with tears that I was trying desperately not to shed. I felt like such a fool, such an absolute, complete, pathetic fool. How had I not seen this? How had I let this happen? How had I let someone use me so completely and so carelessly? And then the anger came. Not the hot, explosive anger that makes you want to break things, but the cold, quiet anger that settles into your bones and turns everything crystal clear. I was angry at Vanessa for betraying me. I was angry at this mysterious other man for being part of her scheme. But mostly I was angry at myself for being so blind, for ignoring every warning sign, for ignoring the dreams that God had sent to wake me up. For loving someone so much that I lost myself completely in the process. That night I did something I had not done in months. I got down on my knees beside my bed and I prayed. Real prayer, not the casual half-hearted prayers I sometimes mumble before meals, but deep, desperate, crying out God prayer. I said, Lord, I do not know if you can hear me, but I need you. I said, I am lost and confused and broken and I do not know what to do. I said, if you are showing me something through these dreams, please help me understand. Please protect me. Please guide me. Please do not let me drown. I do not know how long I knelt there. It might have been minutes, it might have been hours, but at some point I felt this peace wash over me. This calm that I could not explain. Anger was still there, but it was not controlling me anymore. The hurt was still there, but it was not destroying me anymore. I felt like someone had put their hand on my shoulder and told me that everything was going to be okay, that I was not alone, that I was seen and known and loved by something greater than myself. I got into bed that night expecting another nightmare, but what I experienced was completely different. In this dream, I was standing outside of a tall building. It looked like an apartment complex or maybe an office tower. There was nothing remarkable about it except for the fact that it was on fire. Flames were pouring out of every window. Smoke was billowing into the sky. The heat was so intense that I could feel it even from a distance. But for some reason, I was walking toward the building instead of away from it. I was walking through the front door and into the lobby and toward the stairs like I belonged there. Like I lived there. I started climbing the stairs, and with every floor I ascended, the heat grew more intense and the smoke grew thicker and the flames grew closer. I could see the fire now. It was everywhere, consuming everything, spreading with terrifying speed. And I realized with sudden clarity that if I kept climbing, I would be consumed too. I would be trapped in this burning building with no way out, and I would die in the flames. And then I heard the voice again, that same deep, resonant voice from my previous dream, the voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The voice said, "Walk away, I am saving you." I stopped climbing. I turned around. I started walking back down the stairs, and with every step down, the flames receded. The smoke cleared, the heat faded. By the time I reached the lobby, the fire was contained to the upper floors and I was standing in cool, clean air. I walked out the front door and turned around and watched the building burn, and I knew that I had made it out just in time. I had escaped before the fire could touch me. I woke up with tears streaming down my face, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, tears of gratitude, tears of understanding. I finally knew what I needed to do. I finally understood what God had been trying to tell me all along. The burning building was not just a symbol, it was a prophecy. If I stayed with Vanessa, I would be consumed. If I kept walking toward the fire, I would be destroyed. But if I listened to the voice, if I trusted the warning, if I turned around and walked away, I would survive, I would be saved. I confronted Vanessa the next morning. She was making coffee in the kitchen, humming a song I did not recognize when I walked in and told her we needed to talk. She turned around with that familiar look of mild annoyance and asked what was wrong. I told her I knew. I told her about the bank statements. I told her about the restaurants and the hotels and the late-night rides. I told her I knew about the other man and the money and the lies. Her reaction was everything I needed to confirm that I was making the right decision. She did not apologize. She did not try to explain. She did not even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, she got angry. She started yelling at me for snooping through her things. She called me paranoid and controlling and insecure. She said I was the problem. She said I was the one who had driven her away with my constant neediness and my pathetic attempts to buy her love. And then she started crying, fake tears streaming down her face as she begged me to forgive her. She said it was a mistake. She said she was confused. She said she would end it with the other man and we could start over and things would be different this time. She was manipulating me the way she had always manipulated me, and for a moment I felt myself wavering. For a moment I almost believed her. But then I remembered the dreams. I remembered the voice telling me to walk away. I remembered the burning building and the flames and the certainty that if I did not leave now I would be destroyed. And I found a strength I did not know I had. I looked Vanessa in the eyes and I said, "It is over." I said, "I am done." I said, "I deserve better than this." She screamed at me, she threw things, she called me every name in the book. She threatened to ruin my life and tell everyone what a terrible boyfriend I had been. But I did not react. I did not argue. I did not engage. I just packed a bag with my essentials and walked out the door, and I did not look back. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life, but also some of the most important. I was sleeping on my friend's couch. I was still drowning in debt. I was still working 12-hour shifts at the warehouse. Nothing about my external circumstances had changed except that I no longer had Vanessa draining my bank account and my spirit. But something inside me had shifted. I felt lighter, cleaner, like I had been carrying a weight I did not even know was there and had finally set it down. I started praying every night. Not desperate panic prayers, but quiet, grateful conversations with God. I thanked Him for the dreams. I thanked Him for the warnings. I thanked Him for giving me the strength to walk away. I did not know what was going to happen next. I did not know how I was going to climb out of the financial hole I had dug myself into. But I trusted that He had a plan. I trusted that He had not saved me from the fire just to let me freeze in the cold. 2 weeks after I left Vanessa, I got a phone call from a number I did not recognize. Against my better judgment, I answered it, and on the other end was a detective from the local police department. He asked if I knew a woman named Vanessa Mitchell, and I said yes, she was my ex-girlfriend. He asked how long we had been together, and when we had broken up, and whether I had any knowledge of her financial activities. I felt my stomach drop. I asked what this was about, and the detective told me something that made my blood run cold. He said Vanessa and her boyfriend were being investigated for an elaborate financial fraud scheme. They had been running credit card scams and identity theft operations and money laundering through fake business accounts. Multiple people had been defrauded out of tens of thousands of dollars. The authorities had been building a case for months, and they were about to make arrests. The detective asked if I had ever been involved in any of these activities. He asked if I had ever signed any documents for Vanessa or opened any accounts in my name on her behalf. He asked if I knew the man she had been working with. I answered every question honestly, and by the end of the conversation it was clear that I was not a target of the investigation, but that I very easily could have been. I hung up the phone and sat there in stunned silence. My mind was racing through all the documents Vanessa had asked me to sign over the past year, all the times she had borrowed my identification for random reasons, all the accounts and passwords she had access to. If I had stayed with her even a few more weeks, my name could have been all over that fraud case. I could have been arrested. I could have been charged with crimes I did not commit. I could have lost everything. The dreams had not just saved me from heartbreak, they had saved me from prison. The miracle did not end there. About a month after the investigation news, an email came through from the corporate headquarters of the company I worked for. They were announcing a new employee relief program, a debt forgiveness initiative for long-term workers who had demonstrated dedication and loyalty, workers like me who had shown up every day for years without complaint. I applied for the program not really expecting anything but figuring I had nothing to lose. 2 weeks later, I got a letter saying that I had been approved. The company was paying off 60% of my outstanding loans as a thank you for my years of service. 60%, thousands and thousands of dollars. Debt that I thought would be hanging over my head for decades was suddenly gone. I sat on my friend's couch holding that letter and I cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming gratitude. I had spent so long feeling invisible, feeling forgot, feeling like God had abandoned me to struggle alone. But He had not forgot me. He had been working behind the scenes the entire time. He had been preparing this blessing while I was still drowning. He had been making a way even when I could not see it. 3 months later, I was promoted to shift manager at the warehouse, a position I had wanted for years but had never been considered for, a position with better hours and better pay and better benefits. My financial situation went from desperate to stable to actually hopeful for the first time in my adult life. I moved out of my friend's house and into my own apartment. Nothing fancy, but it was mine and I had earned it. I started going to church again, a small congregation not far from where I grew up, where the people were warm and welcoming and nobody cared that I showed up in jeans and work boots. I found a community there, a family, people who supported me and encouraged me and reminded me that I was never as alone as I had felt. I heard later what happened to Vanessa. She and her partner were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud and theft. Their assets were frozen, their accounts were seized. She lost her job and her apartment and everything she had been building with my money and other people's money. The case made local news for a few weeks and then faded away like most things do. I do not know where she is now and I do not particularly care. I have forgiven her because holding on to bitterness was only poisoning my own heart, but that does not mean I want her in my life. Some people are lessons, not blessings, and Vanessa taught me more about my own worth than anyone else ever has. I think about those dreams often. The car with the other man, the door with the voices, the burning building, the voice telling me to walk away. I used to think that God only spoke to prophets and pastors and people who had dedicated their lives to ministry. I used to think that divine communication was reserved for special occasions and special people. But those dreams taught me that God speaks to anyone who is willing to listen. He speaks through circumstances and through other people, and yes, sometimes through visions in the night. I am not special. I am still just a warehouse worker from Georgia trying to make sense of this complicated world. But I am also living proof that God sees the ordinary people, that He protects us even when we do not deserve it, that He warns us about dangers we cannot see and guides us toward futures we cannot imagine. All we have to do is listen. I am telling you this story because I know there is someone out there who needs to hear it. Someone who is in a relationship that is draining them. Someone who is giving everything to a person who does not value them. Someone who has been having strange feelings or vivid dreams or a persistent sense that something is wrong but keeps pushing it aside because it seems irrational. If that is you, I want you to know that your intuition is not crazy. Your feelings are not paranoia. That voice in your head that keeps whispering this is not right might be more than just anxiety. It might be divine warning. It might be God trying to save you from a fire you cannot see yet. I also want to encourage anyone who is struggling financially or emotionally or spiritually. Anyone who feels like they are at the end of their rope with nowhere left to turn. I was there. I was so deep in the pit that I could not see any way out. I was so broken that I had stopped believing things could get better. But they did get better, not overnight, not easily, not without struggle and sacrifice and hard work. But they got better. God did not just remove me from a toxic relationship. He restored what had been stolen from me. He blessed me with opportunities I never expected. He surrounded me with people who genuinely cared about my well-being. He proved to me that hitting rock bottom is not the end of the story. It is just the beginning of the climb back up. If you're going through something right now that feels impossible, I want you to know that nothing is impossible with God. I want you to know that your current circumstances are not your final destination. I want you to know that the same God who spoke to me through dreams and warnings and miracles sees you too. He knows your name. He knows your struggle. He knows exactly what you need and exactly when you need it. My grandmother used to say that God's timing is perfect even when it does not feel like it. She said He is never early and never late, but always right on time. I did not understand what she meant until I lived through it, until I saw how every piece of my story fit together in ways I could never have planned. The breakup that felt like devastation was actually liberation. The financial crisis that felt like drowning was actually preparation for a breakthrough. The dreams that felt like nightmares were actually lifelines. I did not lose Vanessa, I was saved from her, and that distinction has made all the difference. Today I am in a different place, a better place. I am building a life that is not dependent on anyone else's validation or approval. I am learning to love myself the way I used to love others. I am saving money and paying off the rest of my debt and making plans for a future that belongs to me. I am not saying every day is easy because it is not. I am not saying I have everything figured out because I definitely do not. But I am saying that I have hope now, real hope. The kind of hope that comes from knowing you are not walking this path alone. If you have read this far, I want you to do something for me. I want you to pay attention to the warnings in your own life. Pay attention to the dreams you have been dismissing. Pay attention to the feelings you have been ignoring. Pay attention to the still small voice that whispers when everyone else is shouting. That voice might be trying to save your life. And if you are in a situation right now that you know you need to leave but you are afraid to take the first step, I want you to know that the step is worth it. It will be hard. It will be scary. It will feel like you are jumping off a cliff with no guarantee that you will land safely. But I promise you there is solid ground on the other side. There is freedom, there is peace, there is a life that is waiting for you once you stop clinging to the thing that is slowly killing you. Trust the process, trust the warnings, trust the God who sees you even when you cannot see him. Walk away from the burning building before the fire touches you. You deserve to be saved too. And if my story has touched you in any way, I only ask that you share it with someone who might need to hear it. Someone who is in a situation like the one I was in. Someone who is drowning and does not know there is a lifeline within reach. We all need reminders sometimes that we are not alone, that miracles still happen, that God still speaks to ordinary people in extraordinary ways. This was my story, but it does not have to be just my story. It can be yours too if you are brave enough to listen.